So Bill Rourke,
Present.
Casey Crichton, absent. Connie Woodbury,
Yeah, thanks.
Denise Bacon,
Here.
Jeremiah Horton, Leonard Rydell,
Present.
Merrill Kunkel, present.
Here.
Mike Googler,
Yeah, I figured out how to get on.
okay. And Peter Sedaris is excused. Okay, we have the roll. So we'll move.
Right. Shall we move on to the committee purpose and general background?
Yeah, this is Brett Music, senior engineer here at the city. I kind of we touched on this subject at the first CAC meeting that was focused on the water and wastewater master plan updates. On this one, we're doing the stormwater master plan update. So that's going to be the focus of tonight's discussion presentation. Consultant from consultant HBH, Natalie Jennings, will be doing that presentation. I just want to touch on, I had included an additional memo and some additional information trying to give a better, more complete background of what's happening with the CAC and the ideas behind it and the purpose. And we're on these master plan updates, we're at the early stages of the consultants focusing on updates to the models, updating the existing conditions and starting to do that analysis. The next phase of things will be identifying projects and project prioritizations based upon the thresholds in the master plan updates. And then from those will come a list of projects. And then through this process, we'll be presenting materials to the CAC to review, ask questions, provide input, recommendations, and elements that will go into consideration for the master plan update. And there can be things, and I'm anticipating that with the stormwater, that are probably outside of the scope of this current master plan, but there are things we can, on what we're doing with the scope of this project, but there'll be things that we can incorporate, and we've received some items already related to stormwater treatment elements and things. So we're looking to kind of gather that information up for a future project to do a deeper dive into the existing stormwater standards and make some updates there. So the process in a whole is we'll be presenting this information, providing the draft documents and the project lists that come out of the work that the consultants are doing, and ultimately be asking the commission to make a recommendation for the draft master plan to go onto the planning commission for their approval, and then ultimately to the city council for their approval and adoption, and then going forward from that piece of it. So just wanted to touch on that again, and hopefully the memo and the explanation gives a better sense of what we're doing with this project and the CAC's roles within that. So with that, I'll move it on to the presentation. Turn over to Natalie.
Hi, like Brett said, I'm Natalie Jennings with HBH. Andre Chernshov is working with me. Hopefully you can see him somewhere in there. Brett touched on a lot of my first slides here, but I'll breeze through them. Maybe my mouse will work. All right, so what is a stormwater master plan? Now, some of this information you guys might know. I don't want to offend anyone, but I'm just telling you in case you don't know, some of you. So some of it's fairly basic, but hopefully it makes you understand what's going on here. So there's going to be 6 chapters in the master plan, a lot of which is background information, highlighting things like the geography and rainfall, that sort of thing that describes what the climate is that all of this stuff is happening in. Then it moves into evaluating the system. And that's really from 2 perspectives, from the maintenance perspective. So the maintenance staff has weighed in and given us like a list of all their problem areas, things that they need to be improved, more staff recommendations, things like that. As well as we're creating a hydraulic model. Well, the previous master plan created the hydraulic model, and we've done a lot of updates to it. Because there's been a lot of changes to the city system since then. we're also quickly reviewing some of the stormwater standards and staffing levels. We'll get into that in a bit. And then we're going to provide recommendations for improvements and estimated costs for those improvements in the end. So that's what a master plan is. Why are we updating it? There's the city code requires that every 5 years we update the stormwater master plan. And it's been 6 since it was last updated. So it's time. Also since 2014, which was when the last one came out, there's been a significant amount of development. So it changes the flow patterns in the city to an extent that really dramatically changes some of the effects. Also, the design standards were updated and we're bringing the stormwater master plan to reflect that. There's the riverfront master plan, which I don't know if you guys are familiar with, but that was a different type of master plan for the riverfront area, and we're incorporating the recommendations from that into some of the stormwater planning. All right, so project scope. This slide was mainly given so that you can reference it later in case you want to, but we can go into it quickly. Task A is project management. That goes with every project. Task B is the bulk of a lot of the project. It's the existing system evaluation. It's the evaluating the hydraulic model, updating it with the new pipes in the system since 2014, that sort of thing. Evaluating maintenance recommendations, that sort of thing. And then we go into the future system analysis, which is the capital improvement plan, which is the projects that will need to fix some of the issues we found in the existing system evaluation. And then the maintenance evaluation was a separate task, but it kind of goes in parallel with task B. Talked about that a little bit. And so we haven't prioritized the projects yet. We have a good idea what they are going to be, but we wanted to get some input from the technical advisory committee and you guys before we finalize what those projects are and prioritize them. So that's where that's at the moment. And then documentation is, of course, ongoing. And then you guys are task G, the CAC, TAC, Planning Commission, City Council. So TAC is Technical Advisory Committee. You guys know what you are, CAC. So, and then the final project is task H. So you guys' role, I think Brett covered this pretty well. We can look through it again if we want, but essentially you're here to listen, ask questions, provide input if you want, and then after the next meeting, they'll hopefully recommend that we send this to the Planning Commission for their review, which will send it to City Council for approval. So I wanted to cover some quick definitions in case they weren't clear if you're not super familiar with stormwater terminology. So hydrology and hydraulics. So hydrology is the natural stuff. It's the stuff before it enters the collection system. It's rainfall and overland flow and that sort of thing. Hydraulics is the man-made stuff, or it can be a creek or something if it's modeled. But usually it's man-made or a channel. And it's after it hits the conveyance system. Okay. Now this is going to be an important concept, these three together, as we move forward into talking about some flooding and surcharging and whatever. So this down here at the bottom is called a hydraulic profile. So it's literally if we sliced into the earth right beside a pipe and saw what happened. So the blue portion is a pipe that's full of water. That's why it's blue. The gray portion is signifying dirt. These vertical portions here are manholes or catch basins in between the pipes. And so what this is showing as the hydraulic grade line is this blue line. Can you guys see my mouse or not? Okay. Perfect.
Yes. Yes.
So this is the hydraulic grade line, and to not get into a whole bunch of very complicated physics, it's the kinetic plus potential energy of the water. So if this line is above the ground surface, then we have flooding. So that means that the water has pushed itself up and above the ground surface because it's backed up in the pipe.
I have a question on that.
Yes.
I live on Pinehurst Drive for 45 years, and I noticed there's a couple catch basins there that are noticed as overflowing, and I've never noticed that they've ever overflowed. So the question is this study take into account actual observations, or is it a mathematical solution only?
Both. Can I answer that question on either the next slide or maybe the one after?
Sure.
I don't want to ignore it, but I've got a better graphic for it. So, okay, going back to this, and then I promise I'll answer your question. So when we talk about flooding, it means that the water is above the ground surface. And then when we talk about surcharging, it's like filled up the entire pipe, but it's going up in the manhole or in the catch basin, but hasn't reached the ground surface yet. Let's see if this next slide. Here, I'll come back to that one since he had asked a question about it. All right, so this one is this discusses the return period that Leonard, I don't know if he knows who he was talking about or not, but how we do these stormwater master plans is based off of the 25-year storm. Well, the 25-year storm doesn't necessarily mean it happens every 25 years. It means that there is a 4% chance of any of that storm happening in any given year. So you take 100 and divide it by the return period, and that's what percentage of annual occurrence you get. So just because you've lived somewhere for 25 years doesn't mean that you've actually experienced a 25-year storm. Also, you have to pick a design storm, which is the frequency of rainfall. So you have if you were to graph it, you would have time on one axis and then intensity of rainfall on the other. And you have to pick a shape for that curve, and every rainfall event is different. There's a standard hypothetical curve you use for different regions of the United States. We just have all decided that that's the common rainfall pattern on average. And so you have to pick something. You're never going to be able to pick what your actual rainfall event is going to be. You never know. It could rain really hard for 2 hours and then not for an hour and then really hard for 3 hours. You just have to pick something. So that's the standard way of doing it. To my knowledge, Newburgh hasn't actually experienced a 25-year flood in the last 25 years. So I don't have all the data on that. Was there a question? Oh, okay, maybe not. If you have a question, just chime in later. All right, I'll go back. Hopefully it'll let me. Okay. So this is, am I echoing on anyone else's or just mine? Okay. All right, I guess I'm fine. So going to basins. So a basin is, it drains to a specific point, and usually along a creek. In Newburgh, there's 3 main basins: the Chehalem Creek Basin, the Hess Creek Basin, and the Springbrook Basin. And these are all broken into smaller subbasins. So like you can see over here, what's highlighted in blue is a subbasin. And so it's this street flows to this pipe. That way we can route it through the model to see where it goes. I'll go back to the slide that I was on and talk about a capital improvement plan and system development charge. Capital development plan is the end goal of this project, really. We're trying to figure out how to fix the problems and how the city wants to prioritize them over the next 20 years, understanding full well that most likely you won't be able to afford everything in 20 years. So don't get scared when you see the big numbers. It's just an idealistic plan. Yeah, you gotta start somewhere. System development charges, these are paid by new users to the system. They have to pay their fair share, assuming that everyone paid their SDCs when they joined the system. Everyone else is already paid, so that's how SDCs work. And they're fairly complicated. You can ask me about them if you don't understand. Okay, so back to this 25-year, 24-hour storm event. In Newburgh, that's 4 inches in 24 hours is the standard that we use based off of the maps. The state of, I think it's NOAA that produces the maps that show where everywhere in the western states. Oregon has their own map, but how much rainfall it is for your very specific location. It kind of looks like a topographic map, but it's for rainfall. They're called isopluvial maps if anyone wants a crazy spelling word. Okay, so with this 25-year event, that's the standard for almost every city that I've ever worked with. It became the new standard for Newburgh in 2015. To look at that, it used to be the 10-year design storm. So if you are to compare what the capital improvements were in the last plan versus what the capital improvements will be in this plan, they're going to be a lot worse because we've changed the criteria. So we've changed the target of what we're shooting for. Just a heads up on that. Another criteria for capital improvements is maintenance crews having issues in the area. So there's some areas of town that don't theoretically have problems with the 25-year event, but maintenance always has to address them. Like one of their major issues is they have some catch basins that are not very well designed, and the shape of them leads themselves to getting clogged all the time. So they're not letting water into the pipe system, and it is causing a lot of problems. So those are capital improvements now. All right, so the next few slides I might bump back and forth between them a lot. They're essentially red is bad, yellow is not as bad, and orange is somewhere in the middle. The next one, it'll go all the way to purple, like just follow the rainbow, and like that was the natural progression that I decided to use for these. If anyone's colorblind, let me know and I can try and point out some of these things. Okay, so essentially this first map, what we're looking at is whether it floods at the 2-year event, the 10-year, or the 25-year event. So if it floods at the 2-year event, that means that on average it's flooding every other year, which means it's a much bigger problem than something that only floods at the 25-year event. So areas particularly down here in the southern area, there is a lot of along Center Street is one of the major areas. Springbrook has some issues. That's an ODOT right away though, so we don't get to address that. There's some issues in 1st, 2nd, and 3rd down here. Another issue is interesting because this only floods at the 10-year event, but you'll see on the next slide that it actually floods for a very long time at the 10-year event. So this is Springbrook Road. There are some undersized pipes down here. This part is all good and new. I think from the roundabout for a while, but then they didn't update it all the way down. So there's some issues there. It's back. Okay, so I'm going to go to the next slide. It looks similar, except for it's telling you different things. So this slide is telling you how long it floods during the 25-year event. So it's severity of flooding, not frequency of occurring like the first one. So as you can see, this area along Springbrook, it had only flooded at the 10-year event, but when it does flood, it floods for a long time. Over here as well, when it does flood, it floods for a long time. And these areas down here were flooding at the 2-year event, but they don't flood for as long. They flood for up to 10 hours. So those are detailed things that we can look through or whatever. Yeah, I don't know how much detail we want to go into them, but I know Brett had wanted me to look at a few projects in particular, but I'm not exactly sure what he wants me to do. Maybe input, Brett. You're still muted. Maybe I unmute you. Oh,
There we go. I believe I'm unmuted now. Okay, my thought was that there'd be a few, some of these areas you're kind of talking about, the Springbrook Road area, is just to show what you're finding as you're doing this analysis, and what the both the flooding related to the storm event plus the duration that plays into ultimately identifying projects and what the fix is, and then ultimately with the prioritization element there. So
gotcha. Sorry for
yeah,
my miscommunication on that.
areas that on the committee has an interest in that we can put through.
For sure. So we can talk, we sort of talked about this area up by Springbrook a little bit. There's some 8-inch pipes down here, and there's a lot of 30-inch pipes, and the whole thing needs to be 30-inch pipes, because if you imagine a large pipe diameter sucking down into a tiny pipe diameter, that doesn't work very well. Let's see some of the other major issues. So this is another key project area that we'd want to look at. It was flooding in the 2 to 10 hour range down Center Street, but it floods at the 2-hour event. At the 2-year event. So there's some pretty significant flooding here. One solution we have is, so River Road is going to be constructed at some major improvements in the next few years. So we're trying to incorporate a stormwater project into that, because it is a lot cheaper to coordinate stormwater or any other utility projects with transportation projects, because paving is expensive. And so if you don't have to pave twice, it's always better. So we're gonna do that. And then also, so we're going to put a line down river, which is right here, so parallel to it, and it'll take pressure off this Center Street line without having to upgrade it, as well as there has to be something in river anyway. So it will relieve it, and it's going to go all the way down to the river. That's one. The majority of these are based on undersized pipes, is really what it all comes down to. There's a lot of constrictions. They fixed one area upstream and it didn't fix everything. Yeah, are there any particular areas of concern for anyone that you want me to talk about specifically?
I would like to ask just a question very quickly. Before, you were giving your definition of flooding and as water that's made its way to the surface. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, do you differentiate between water that's on the surface and water that's potentially damaging? Because they can be two different things. And,
very much.
Yeah, and so with the prioritization, it would seem to think to go one step perhaps further than you have with these two models. And so what are the areas that have the most potential for damage, or are damaged or currently damaging road systems, or whatever it might be, or inundating homes, or however that works. It just seems like there's flooding, there's more to it than just water. You know what I'm saying? It is the impact it has.
Right. And I believe that's in the current prioritization list. That is another slide later on. We'll get to it. And if not, then I agree with you that it should be added to it. But quantifying what damage would be caused is probably beyond the scope of what we can do. But we can say, oh, that's surrounded by houses. It's probably more important than this one that's in the middle of a field. Sure. Or something like that. Like it would be that level of prioritization probably, as opposed to.
It's just, I think in reading this, just something comes to mind. It's local to here, so I walk past it a lot. But there's an area that where there's not really a lot of houses. There's some industry and there's some railroad tracks and some other things, which seems to be a consistently difficult problem there, which, you know, clearly needs to be addressed, of course. But if there is an area where homes are being inundated, or, you know, roads are being destroyed or something like that, it would seem, even though that looks like there's a lot of water on the road, that may not be the one that you want to make top of the list, is what I'm saying. So,
I'd like to make a comment too. There's 2 orange dots on that map that are right on top of my house. And so obviously I'm a little skeptical of how much we should rely on this type of information.
Okay, where's your house?
On Pinehurst, between Pinehurst Drive and the church.
So Pinehurst, if I remember right, is that somewhere near? Are you north or south of the railroad tracks?
Well, actually, on this map, it's a red dot on my house.
Is it by
Wait,
Furcrest? Where are you at?
Left, just across, go left a bit, stop. Right,
There?
right, no, just to the right of that, there's a red and no, back to where you were.
This
That-
one?
That red, that's my house. And then the orange one's behind it.
It's not letting me zoom in any further. Okay. Well,
I mean, it feels like we need some ground truthing on some of this. I mean, math is one thing.
but I think what I'm telling you is that we haven't experienced a 25-year storm. So you don't know.
I've been here 45 years.
Okay. I don't know what to tell you. We just go off of industry standard practices.
I would recommend maybe we do some ground truthing and interview the people at these spots. I mean, we're trying to set up how much money we need to spend, right?
Correct. I don't feel like I can answer that question. Do you feel like you can answer that question, Brett? You're still muted. Maybe I have to unmute you. Oh, got muted again.
Okay. Yeah, so what we've been doing is we've been having conversations with maintenance, kind of on that elements to kind of see, are we to check this, what's being done with what the model's showing versus what's been experienced in the field. So what we've done to date is talking with maintenance crews and getting information. And I think Natalie has gotten some updated information there related to these maps that will be incorporated into as part of identifying projects. And so that's the method we're using to kind of do some ground truthing currently.
can I ask if, so with the color coding that you're using here, you're actually identifying potential problems, but not necessarily potential recommendations for prioritization.
So I didn't put it on here because I didn't really want to go into this too much, but the blue lines are the proposed projects at the moment. So I didn't want to spend too much time on this, just because we wanted to talk about existing problems and not necessarily solutions today. But like I said, we have gone through and figured out what a lot of the solutions are. We just wanted to, but so replacing a few pipes here and there. So like the one he was concerned about, it's a pipe here and a pipe there. And I have to go through and find the specifics of what exactly was causing that one problem. So it's flooding in between 2 to 10 hours, which is pretty minor flooding. So in reality, it's not most likely going to be a project that is going to happen anytime soon. So yes, it's in the capital improvement plan, but by the time it's prioritized, it's not probably going to be prioritized very high. And so that means that if it's prioritized 30 years ago, 30 years from now, that means other things are going to come up in the next 30 years that jump ahead of it, essentially.
So again, to my question, so the color coding on these maps are the identification you've made based on the industry standard, as you were explaining before, but not necessarily what will be the recommendation for the priority projects.
So, okay, yes, I think I understand your question now. So the lines in blue are projects. They are not prioritized at all. Does that answer your question better?
No, what I'm saying is that you've got red and orange, and I guess to Leonard's comment, what am I hearing from Leonard is he doesn't think his house is going to flood this week, so or the next few years or whatever. So Leonard's house may not be, or his street may not be, just because it's red, may not be a priority project. Is that correct?
Correct. There's other prioritization that goes into it. So
these colors are based on a projection of what could be potential problem in this hypothetical 25-year period, correct?
it's based off of how much are they mathematically a problem.
Yeah.
That's what.
And / maintenance reports,
Yes.
but not necessarily how the city wants to approach in the timeline.
Correct. Yeah, and I imagine we're going to spend part of next meeting when we have the prioritized improvements prioritized with you all going, well, is that what you actually want to do or whatever? So just so you know, that's coming. That's not going to be a total dismissal of that idea. It just isn't right now, but it is coming.
If we understand what your intent is with your illustrations, then it makes it easier for us to make decisions further down.
Yes. Do you understand now?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay.
I don't think we should make decisions on funding until the actual thing that we propose to fund has been verified in the field by talking to the neighbors. I mean, this is a good way to identify where the problems might be, but it's not really a good way to determine what the problems actually are. We have a maintenance crew, and as far as I can tell, they keep records of where they spend their time. We should use their records and use that to update this map so we really have a report that's meaningful, that means something.
That's the next map I'm going to show you. So that's in addition to the computer system model. Yeah, so we're not neglecting the maintenance. They use a system called Cartograph, and they record everything that they do. And we have that included as well in a separate map. So, and some of those items line up and some of them don't. And obviously the ones that line up are going to be the highest priorities. So did I see a hand from you, Meryl?
Yeah, I think Leonard just asked it, actually. I was going to say if you guys have maintenance records and you could see what past problems were and use that as sort of a way to verify whether these are current issues or if they're projected issues, but you answered that already, so.
And some of them are both and some of them are one or the other. There are maintenance problems that are not in the hydraulic model because of things like poorly designed catch basins. Those aren't going to show up in a hydraulic model. And then there's areas that maintenance hasn't ever really had a problem there. And so most likely how that's going to play out as these projects come up is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Brett, but usually how projects come about in cities are, well, if someone has a really big problem somewhere, they're going to want to address that first. So that's usually how it goes. Let me know, Brett.
Yeah, that's a big part of it. Identifying them projects where we identify that there's issues that are occurring are going to be the highest priority is the typical scenario.
Can I ask you another question, please? With maintenance reports and and observations of problem areas. Is the level of street debris taken into account rather than just the location of pipes and things like that? It's just an observation of my own about street debris clogging.
Yeah, so as maintenance has provided information, they've given us, and some of the information they provided, they've identified areas where things are being clogged from debris on the roadway, things that are getting into the system. So that's being taken into consideration as well.
And I should note that none of it assumes on the hydraulic model that everything is clean, because if you can fix something with a maintenance solution, it's going to be a lot cheaper than upsizing the pipe because there's debris getting in it. So there's maintenance recommendations as well as capital improvement recommendations. And the maintenance ones are going to be a lot cheaper than the capital improvement ones, because if you say we need to hire somebody for half time to clean out catch basins, it's going to be a lot cheaper than a $500,000 storm project. So, yeah. All right. With that, let's move on to the maintenance map. And I feel like there's going to be more questions about that. So this map shows a few things. It shows pipes that are less than 25 years old, 25 to 50, and more than 50 years old. And unfortunately, a lot of the pipes, the ones that are black, are unknown. We don't know how old they are. So maintenance assumes that a lot of them are older than 50 years, but we don't know. It's not in the GIS. So it's just one of those things that is a work in progress. And I believe Keith has been working diligently to as quickly as possible. But if you've ever worked with the GIS system, it's a lot of data, and he has got a big plate on his shoulders. So it also shows some different pipe types here, which I should have asked Brett beforehand what those stood for. And I'm sorry for not writing them out. I needed to do that, and I did not do that. The other colors are what I was assuming were not modern day pipe types. And so we probably want to update them. But as you can see, there aren't that many on there at all of those. So it isn't that big of an issue. So another thing is maintenance gave us, it shows 4 issues on here. Oops. Nope. Whoa, I really zoomed out there. Sorry. Coming back, promise. Okay. There we have some more. Maintenance's first spreadsheet was not very complete in terms of their number of problem areas and locations. We have a lot more since I made this figure into this draft. So just know that there's more coming. Yeah, that's kind of how we're highlighting these issues. So any questions on the maintenance stuff?
I look at that map and I see just 4 red dots of reported flooding areas. So that's quite a different opinion you get of what we need to do than the previous maps we were looking at.
Well, I just told you that we have a market list that incorporate for the next draft. We just didn't have it before this draft was done. So I guess I'm just letting you know that this is how we're approaching this, but it's not done at the moment. Okay. So this goes into the prioritization, and this is stuff you guys can definitely weigh in on. So these are the categories we have and the weighing factors. So you essentially rank the projects within these categories and then multiply the weighing factor to get your prioritization. So so safety and liability, it's, I don't know if you guys want me to read these all, or if you want to just take a moment to read them yourself, that might be better, and then we can talk about them.
Can I ask how you developed the weighting factor?
It was from the previous plan. We added one criteria this time. The new criteria was the flooding frequency. They hadn't considered how often it floods before, just whether or not it was flooding. So that's the only new one. And those are open to change based on your input, TAC input, our input. It really depends on how the city wants to prioritize things. So just because they did it like this before doesn't mean we have to do it like this now.
Does that mean you make a decision by adding up all the numbers for a particular project, and then with all the projects, you have a weighted number, and then that's how you assign your priority?
More or less, but we make sure the numbers make sense. You know, it's an educated number ranking system. It's not just blindly going at it and hoping for the best. We do it, but then we make sure that reality was what we were, it's a solution that makes sense. I mean, I'm not trying to say we fudge the numbers too much, but we don't want something to come up because of some weird combination of lower priority criteria combined makes it a lot worse, you know? We do use engineering judgment too to prioritize these a little bit. Yeah.
So if you add them up, there's 5 points. It looks like safety only gets 20% of the weighting factor.
Should we
Yep.
consider bumping that up in your opinion?
I'm just asking a question, is that maybe it should be a higher priority?
We can certainly look into it. Yeah, this is what this is the point of this meeting, is to hear as input on what you guys feel is important. So if you disagree with what's been done before, that's totally fine. Of course, we have to balance everybody's input, but this is the place for input. So
When you say liability, what do you mean by that?
I think that's towards your concern of earlier, if like, how big of a problem is it going to be for the city if this floods? Like, does it hurt someone's house, or is it? That's my interpretation of it. I only get the interpretation of how I understand it from what the previous thing said. So let me know if anyone interpreted it differently. So
I just wonder there's a impact. I guess I don't mean to be a pain, but I'm just trying to make sure I understand the terminology you're using specifically. So you're saying liability is whether or not the city gets sued because they didn't do it or something like that. Is that what you're saying?
I'm not exactly sure why that word was used. I didn't write it. It was from before.
Okay. So the
We
reason
can change that word if you're uncomfortable with it.
I think, please don't think that my questions are about you needing to change something. It's just so I can understand and be clear about what you're telling us, and then also what we're expected to get back to you. So impact, it would seem to me, because if it's liability, then that's a different thing than impact. And I guess I was speaking of impact.
So impact in this regard, and we might want to change the phrasing on this to make it more clear, is like, are you flooding a whole subdivision, or are you flooding 2 houses? You know, that kind of a thing.
Sure. That's not what it says by the description, though, because it says, is it a benefit, which is different. But I'm not quite sure when maybe there could be a revisitation of the specific words used, and maybe those specific words didn't have some kind of definition to them, so that we know exactly this criteria before we kind of sign off on it. I think. I don't know what.
I'm wondering. Okay, and I apologize because I didn't create that those, oh, I don't think I gave that portion to you guys to it. So I will have to look into that, but I agree that that is a good idea. So
An example might be safety and liability actually not being put in the same thing. That might be a good idea because it's two different things. So, and then liability would be, where is the safety would be, is this a safety concern? Will people have accidents? Will sewage and, et cetera, et cetera. But liability would be if the city failed to act, what would be the city's liability in that? So they're actually not the same thing at all. And it seems to me they should be two different lines. And impact, again, would seem to me, if you're going to have a benefit impact and a detriment impact, then those should be separated too. And so impact on, infrastructure and, like taking it down to smaller areas, impact to infrastructure, impact to homes, impact to water quality, et cetera, those sorts of things. Because, and then I guess maybe then you still might have a weighting factor, but it would be specific enough then to be able to say, let's just say for argument's sake that impact, the detriment might be that, I don't know what industry exactly is around here, but let's just say there's an oil refinery. I know there's not one, but, and if there was a stormwater flooding event at the oil refinery, the impact would be substantial should it flood and would have certain consequences. And I know I'm just going to back up for a second and say, it seems to me that this is not, and I don't mean to be critical, but it seems to me that this is not the greatest risk assessment platform, and that there are actually ways to kind of extrapolate things out in a different, just having done a number myself, so that the weighting, it becomes easier to make decisions, let's put it that way, because you actually take the risk assessment and you're actually doing the weighting of consequences and things like that in the risk assessment doc. Or so maybe you do have something like that somewhere, but
we haven't done it yet, so
okay.
I will run this past Brett, and maybe we need to take it offline. But
Sure.
would you be open to a different system of prioritizing?
Well, there are models for making risk assessments that are a bit more thorough than just the 3 columns, and they extrapolate out the information a bit better, so that when you do end up with a weighting factor, it's taking a number of things into consideration, I think, as Leonard was speaking about, and so your weighting then is, rather than, as you said, a bit, I don't know, gray. Now, if you take certain engineering implications and other things into consideration, but I can send you the headings of ones that I've used in the past, but it does actually assist you in your decision making so much more if you can extrapolate it out in a risk assessment manner, I guess you could say. It's certainly easier to tell what you should do and what you shouldn't do, it seems to me. But I don't mean to be critical. I'm just kind of struggling with
taking any of these comments today as being critical from anyone. You guys are all being very respectful. The point of this meeting is to give us input. One thing you do need to know, there is a limited budget for this, so we can only do what we can do. But that being said, I would not be opposed to a different prioritization if the technical advisory committee is also okay with it. Would you mind sending it to Brett so we could look over what you're proposing?
Yeah, it really is just a risk assessment, and consequently a prioritization assessment template, really.
Okay.
yeah.
I'm certainly not opposed to at least looking at it. I can't promise we'll be able to use it, but if it would be a better way of looking at things, I'm not opposed to doing that.
It might prove useful, I suppose, but I mean, it's certainly in my project management experience, it has. So I think, if I may too, I know I'm monopolizing a little bit, but having read Leonard's letter just prior to this meeting, I'm sure that a number of us are grappling with. It feels like we're making some pretty big decisions for the city, and I feel like, and I know all of you want us to make the best ones we can make. It just seems if we can really get our heads around things in a meaningful way, then we'll make those better decisions. That's all. So.
I think safety and liability should be almost like 40%. When it rains hard and it's flooding, everybody takes a day off from work and they go around and look how far the water's backing up. But if you drive your car through it and it stalls and it gets washed into a gully, then that's a life savings deal. So I think safety and liability should be at least 40% of the decision-making process. Just that's my idea.
Do
Yes,
you
I'll
have? Go ahead.
I just have been struggling with the unmute element here, I think, like some of us have. So yeah, the idea in all of this is getting some input, and we can revisit these criteria and take them all the ideas into consideration and work to come up with some adjustments to this. I think this is all good dialogue and information to be shared here. So
Great.
Some things to consider if we are considering moving some things up in priority, we also need to probably move other things down in priority. So do we have any comments about things that the city feels like might be less important?
does anyone have any thoughts along that lines?
My quick thought, I'm probably going to be unpopular in Oregon here, but environmental benefit might be one of those things that drops off. Most of these things are pretty neutral with environmental benefit. A pipe in the ground that's inches in one street or a pipe in the ground that's 12 inches in another doesn't really change anything a whole lot. That's one thought. Having fun. Okay. I don't know. Well,
Can you talk to me more about the environmental benefit and how that is determined? Like, how do you determine
sure.
how
Sorry.
it's gonna? What?
I wasn't involved in this one when it got on here, so sorry for feeling slightly unprepared for I should have been. Yeah.
I would I guess I would find it challenging to upgrade or make things more important or less important without, I guess, a little bit more clarification on how the prioritization works and the definitions.
Yeah, I think we need to come up with those together just to make sure we're all on the same page. So I can just go through what my gut feeling is, and like if someone thinks that they're different, chime in. How about we do that? Well, we have a lot of time left in this meeting, and we're getting towards the end of our slides. So safety and liability, I feel like we covered that one pretty good. So safety, we're saying like, is it going to cause an accident? Are people's houses going to be flooded? Liability, is it a liability to the city? Is the city going to get sued? That's what I think our understanding was on that. Flooding frequency.
I'm going to just jump in there and say, I do not think they're the same thing at all.
I think we changed that to being here. Let's just edit this PowerPoint. Why?
Just if I may, it would seem like impact, if anything should go with safety, it should be impact, not liability, because liability will kind of take care of itself as the city takes care of itself, if you know what I'm saying. It's a different issue. But and then the flooding frequency are the three things that kind of go together, aren't they? Safety,
Okay.
impact, and liability. Excuse me, safety, impact, and flooding frequency.
So here's my view of that. Okay, so I don't know why it isn't letting me add a row. It's being dumb. So it's not going to be very well formatted, apparently. Sorry about that. I might just put this in Excel because why not? We might as well hash this out. Can you guys still read that, or is that too small?
That's all right.
We can read it.
Person on the phone is having issues. Okay, so we're gonna take safety and liability. I think my understanding is liability is going away, and we're gonna run this past the TAC. So this may not be final, but this is what we're saying for right now. Because I agree with what you're saying, if liability kind of goes away with when the safety issues go away.
Not necessarily. If you're flooding somebody's house, there's no safety issue at that, but there's a liability problem because your undersized storm drain flooded their house.
Sure. And that kind of goes with impact. And then from that, well,
So
maybe I can be some assistance here, Natalie.
sure.
Maybe if we put the things that are the actual hydrology and oh, I've forgotten the other one. And put those together, and then put the things that the city has to address together. So like the complexity, the long-term maintenance, and liability. There's no reason not to have liability on there, but to put it, kind of where it belongs with the what the city can do about the flooding. Let's just put it that way. So if we kind of did it that way, then maybe it makes a sort of sense. And then the sustainability, livability, really the environmental benefit goes with that, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking too.
So then you have the
So
actual
group these.
behavior of the water, and
potentially?
then you have what the city's going to do about it, and then how that's going to make life better for everybody.
Okay, so should these potentially be, to simplify this and not make it be crazy, should we put one weighing fat? No, never mind. I thought better of that idea, because let's say that why they're separate here is because let's say this portion, it affects a very large area of the city, but it only happens at the 25-year event. So it's going to average out to something that happens at the 2-year event, but is only at a small area of the city. Does that make sense of why having those two together important and not as separate things? I mean, sorry, I grabbed that.
If
Go
we
ahead.
have a D in here, and the D was about what the actual severity of an impact would be, or the severity of doing something or not doing something, then again, this kind of just goes to this template that it's in my mind anyway. So if the city doesn't do something and it floods someone's basement and destroys their house, and the city gets sued, even though it only happened once in 25 years and it was only locally, that would still be something that would be severe and would in truth requires some real consideration, because that the consequences of the action is the severity of the action, the severity of the consequences bumps up its weighting. If you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, so this column we just didn't put it in that table.
Sure.
So it will be, I don't know if we'll put it in the master plan, but it will go into it. This is how we determine what so you'll multiply. So you'll multiply the severity times the weighting factor and get the total.
Yeah.
Essentially. Does that make sense? And then the overall total will. So why don't we just go through and pick an improvement and go through the exercise of prioritizing it together, and then you guys could, if you understand what's going, if you like it, if you don't like it, what we can change. How does that work for everybody? Okay, so the first criteria is safety. So I'm gonna pick one that is, gotta look for a second. Okay. Trying to pick one that isn't like the worst thing in the world, so that, you know. Okay, let's pick a project that is already going to happen. So we know it's going to happen, and we're just going to do the exercise of going through it. So this is the length of time flooding map. So it's this is the area of Libra Street on Crestview. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that. So just background information, it's flooding between 2 and 10 hours, and it is flooding at the 2-year event. So we're putting in a pipe down Crestview, and this is Coffee Lane. That's the solution that we're doing. So let's just walk through what we need to do. So safety. There's a whole bunch of houses in the area that that flood. That is how we. So my thought would be we do this on a scale of 1 to 10, of like severity being like what Connie had said, of if there was an oil refinery, that would probably be a 10, and if it's a field, it's a 1. So my thought would be that since it's a whole bunch of houses that flood a lot, it's going to be around a 7 or an 8. So let's just call that an 8 for now. And then flood frequency, it can show you guys, it floods at the 2-year event. So that's going to be a 10 on this one. Impact, will it benefit a large or a small area? So in this case, it's not really the biggest of areas. It's really just this localized area. So I'd say maybe a 4 on the scale of 1 to 10. It definitely isn't regional, but there's more than one house for sure that gets helped by it.
Well, again, that speaks to using the term benefit. Are you saying that by addressing that area, the benefit to that area is what we're talking about with impact, or we're talking about the detriment impact as well?
So, okay, let's talk about that. So if it's benefiting an area, so let's say we replace this pipe right here. It's really undersized. It's going to fix a lot of these problems up here. So it's going to fix a lot of areas of flooding. Whereas this, it's kind of localized flooding right here. Does that make sense? So
So it's
how
not,
big?
sorry, it's not the impact of the flooding, it's the impact of the project.
Yeah. So if we replace that pipe, how big of an area is going to see improvement? So if, like, let's pick a different area.
Well, obviously, there's a difference between flooding one house and then flooding the factory floor of deck.
Yeah.
They're both small, they're both localized, but there's a huge difference between the two.
Right. And there's a huge difference between flooding one house or flooding 300 houses.
Right,
So,
correct.
so you wanted to add a detriment impact thing too, right? So that would be, no?
Yeah, I think it was my question about the word impact. I guess what we're talking about is the impact of the improvement, not the
Yeah.
impact of the
So
flood.
is there a word that would be better? Area served, perhaps? Would that sound better to you guys? Area with reduced flooding?
That, or I think Connie had mentioned the impact of the improvement. That adds a little clarity to what that impact is in
Sure.
reference to.
Mm.
As a thought.
Does that sound good to everyone? I think that does make it clearer when she mentioned that.
Well, and if we really, well, never mind. Sorry, I've just got my risk assessment hat on, that's all.
Well, the other thing that might be considered is all of this criteria, or these are all related to what is the project achieving.
Mhm, mhm. I guess it would seem to me that it might be useful to have one line that says the impact if you don't improve it.
Okay. Is that kind of safety, or am I misunderstanding the goal with safety?
Well, safety prioritizes what you have to do. And impact may not be the right word, but if you don't do something, what are the consequences of that? Not just if you do something. Yeah.
And I may not be understanding safety. Is that like strictly from it might cause a car accident kind of thing? Is that what we're thinking with that? I'm struggling to understand the difference between consequence of lack of action, which I believe is a good one to have in there, but I don't know if that's actually different than safety. Should we get rid of safety, or is there any specific safety concerns that we want to address?
Well, safety is a consideration for people trying to walk across it or somebody trying to drive across it and then get washed into a gully.
Yeah, and certainly if any kind of groundwater inundation of toxic chemicals or something like that too. So.
Yeah, I don't know if we have enough information to analyze that as part of this project. That it just isn't something that we can get into. They have way more complicated hydraulic models called 2D hydraulic models, which take a lot more time and a lot more data to create. That is not what we were doing for this project.
Well, because really what you're saying here with this, and again, I'm kind of apologizing for butting in, but I think that's what I'm supposed to be doing here too, is that the safety and flooding frequency lines are about the things that happen, the occurrence. But really everything else about is how the city addresses those occurrences. Am I correct there?
I believe so.
And so if we look at that as an occurrence or a likely occurrence, then the weighting factor on those, has to be high because it's about what could happen. And then from then on, it is really about how the city is making its decisions about what it will do. Am I correct?
That makes sense to me.
So that's why consequences of lack of action on something, that's fairly wordy. I'm not quite sure what else to put there, but it's still kind of important because it's how the city makes a decision. If there's light flooding once every 25 years, again, we're going back to that weighting factor. But
I feel like consequences of lack of action is possible to more or less quantify in an objective manner than safety. I don't know how to quantify safety within the data that we have available in a justifiable form. We just don't know. Like the model doesn't go into the detail of, well, does the water stay on the curb or is it in the street? We just know how much water there is, and we don't have any way of determining safety, I think. So are you guys okay with me removing that? Because there's not really an objective way to determine what that is.
Do we know why it was put there in the first place? What was the thought process behind having that there in the first place?
A lot of people always think they can drive across the water. It's not that deep. And then they get out in the middle and their car stops. And then they gotta sit there and wait till the car washes them into the gully, or then they gotta get out and try and walk back to safety. And
Yeah, it's a very valuable concern, but I don't know how to address it because I don't have that information. There's really not a way of knowing what that.
Okay, so you've got flooding frequency based on 2, 5, 10, 25 years. Okay, those are your projections based on arbitrary data, right? Then you have, as Leonard said, you have actual flooding, where there's evidence of actual flooding, correct? You've got that data as well.
Correct.
Right. So, because that's not actually on here. so if we had flooding frequency, which is projected, and then actual historic flooding frequency. And then as opposed to safety, then instead, and we could probably not even have impact there, but impact of flooding, which is the safety issue.
Yeah.
Could you do that?
We can have historic flooding. In terms,
You don't have that.
need to be nice here. We're in between. The city is in between different maintenance record systems, so the maintenance records are not very complete. I don't know how to say that politely, but we don't have like 45 years of data. We have like 2 years of sort of data, so it's not a lot of stuff to pull from. Just letting you guys know that just because maintenance hasn't said that it's a problem doesn't mean that they haven't addressed it. There's been a new system of documentation, and that's where we're at. Does that explain it okay, Brad? Sorry.
Reasonably, yes. Yeah, we're just gathering information, and what we have is some historical knowledge, some institutional knowledge that we've gathered in things where crews and elements have identified areas that they've historically gone out and had flooding issues in different areas. And going back to the safety things, my expectation is that really was related to, I think Leonard was talking about, with the level of water that's in the street, and where is it impacting? Is it truly, when there is an area of flooding, does it get into a home? Does it stay in the street? And that pieces of it, and that's going to mostly come from that observation aspect, and as well as the flooding impact element there. So I think that's where that originally was from, and taking it into account. So the flooding frequency does kind of gather that piece of it up if it's truthed out with observations.
Let me jump in really quick. The safety and liability also probably came about because we have, unfortunately, pipes that are underneath houses and buildings. And that becomes a safety and liability problem if there's something to happen to that pipe, and those types of things. So that's where that came from, probably in the last master plan update. And so,
Aaron, you're correct. I was on that committee and that was exactly the way it was described.
yeah,
Because,
and
because of the pipes that were under houses.
yeah, and we fixed some of those, but we still have, every time we look, we seem to find more, so.
So would the consequence of lack of action cover that now, or are you guys seeing that as something else?
Well, maybe you can return to your impact words, and it's a little awkward, that phrase, consequences of lack of actions, I think, probably. But if you put impact of flooding and then put, yeah, instead of area of improvement, like impact of flooding under historic flooding, the impact of flooding, like you said, if it's the impact is the factory floods, the whatever, whatever, wherever it is it's flooding, that impact of flooding, we describe that and then give a weighting factor to the, as you said, if it's going to flood in a field, it's one thing. If it's under a house, it's another. And take the impact area of improvement perhaps out and include that in sort of the decision making by council or by the city, along with the liability issues for the city, perhaps. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Natalie?
Yes.
This is Mike. I don't, when I talk, my picture doesn't come up, so I'm not sure I know how to run this stupid advanced calculator or not. But if you can hear me, I'm finding this whole exercise somewhat strained exercise in heuristics. No matter how much work we put together in trying to prioritize or come up with some sort of a decision tree, the fact of the matter is that action is going to be taken first as a result of city council, and they're going to have another committee that can't give any kind of a binding recommendation, tell them what they think should be done. Then engineering staff is going to be called upon to do repairs because there's a need. And it doesn't matter, they're not going to sit down and say, okay, we got a call, there's a manhole here on Victoria that's flooding. Let's look at safety and liability first, flooding frequency, complexity. Let's analyze this before we go out there and fix the damn manhole. That's not going to happen. I mean, this really is just an exercise in group heuristic, because we all know that the attention is going to be given not by sitting down and going through a decision tree process on how to fix things. Sorry, my feelings.
It's a legitimate feeling. That happens quite frequently. My understanding of how this is going to happen is it will affect city budgets moving forward.
Well, that's where it's going to. It's going to city budgets. Related to city budgets, one of the questions I've got, we're talking about physical repairs to do, what can be done on the ground, either in the pipe or in the manholes or in the basin generally, in terms of how you design and engineer slopes. Has there been any interest or any attempt to look at what could be done with the bureaucratic process without spending money on physical repairs? I'll give you two examples. They're near Victoria, right off of Springbrook. There's 8.5 acres that I own that we want to put an apartment project in. And through the middle of that 8.5 acres is a stream. It comes out of the ground at the north end of that 8.5 acres right there on Springbrook, runs through a stream corridor to just about the Safeway building or the old Rite Aid building, and then it goes underground again. interesting thing about it is that the stream corridor in Newburgh is designed as a zone. So it's extremely difficult to modify or to change. And this is in spite of the fact that fully a third of the designated stream corridor is not even within the swale. It's completely out of the swale. So as a developer, if I want to come in there and cut the trees down along the banks of the north end of that swale, I could do it because it's not in the stream corridor. Whereas what is in the stream corridor is, it's fescue and it's not part of the stream corridor. So here's a case where you can do some repairs by simply changing the bureaucracy so that instead of it being a zone, it's a land use decision. The other part of it that's interesting is in order to be able to get into the storm manhole at the south end of that 8.5 acres in Springbrook, in order to get into it, the city neglected to create an easement so that the properties adjacent to that manhole that need to tap into it don't have to cross each other's private property. And in this case, the owners of the Payless Safeway building will not give permission to the developer at the north to connect to that manhole. And it's a city manhole. And these are two simple bureaucratic issues that can be done without spending any money on site to allow a flooding problem to be solved. And that's one issue. So the other part, we spend an hour on heuristics and no time on what could be done practically in an hour.
I think that is way beyond the scope of this project. So
Oh, I know
if
that. That's
Brett
because
or Karen wants to answer, they can. Otherwise, we can continue on.
Well, I had a similar problem where I had a rain garden and they couldn't put it in the stream corridor. They couldn't discharge the water into a stream corridor. But they wanted the city had us pipe it to the curb. It ran down the curb into a catch basin, into a pipe that discharged into the stream corridor. Sometimes I just don't, we need to change the stream corridor.
well, there's simple problems to solve, but I'd
Maybe
like to be able to do something that is reasonable, quick, and efficient. I'd like to be able to proceed with this process of trying to determine what priority should be assessed to repairs. But let's talk about all repairs while we're about it.
Correct me if I'm wrong, city staff, but it's my understanding that these areas are not within city. You're not the ones that are causing the problems with the wetlands, right? That's
I think the issues that are raised are valid issues and concerns to be talked about. They're outside of the scope of the Stormwater Master Plan update as a direct piece of that. This is information we can take in and put it up for consideration. There's elements, the stream corridor piece has planning implications and elements there, as well as other, what are the processes to work through that? There's codes that exist, so there's be changes potentially there and items there. If these are areas of concern, there's information we can take in, put into consideration, and at this point, it's passing them on and where they fall outside of what we're doing specifically with the Stormwater Master Plan update currently. And
Well, it's on the map as being, there's a whole bunch of little orange dots right above the stream corridor as being a problem. That is what you indicate you wanted to be part of the Stormwater Master Plan.
yeah, there's projects to resolve that, correct?
Yeah, well,
our pipelines, because the city as well has the same problems with getting into the stormwater corridor, the stream corridors. They can't do it either. So I'm not saying it's not a problem. I'm just saying that I don't think it's through this medium.
So it sounds like what you're saying is that addressing zoning and bureaucratic process isn't part of the scope of this group and isn't part of necessarily the scope of the master plan. Is that correct?
Well, it's definitely not part of the scope, but I'm not even sure who has the ability to do that. It's definitely not this. It's definitely not our company. I'm not even sure it's the city, but they can tell me otherwise.
Well, this is Doug, so I've listened to the conversation. Everybody's bringing up good issues, trying to figure out the criteria for how you prioritize the projects. This committee does have the ability to come up with recommendations outside of the actual stormwater master plan itself to say, based upon our conversations, based upon the stormwater master plan, we believe that there are issues the city should go back and evaluate with how the stream corridor program is administered and should it be changed. That's just one example. That information goes to the planning commission and goes to the council. The council then has the ability to say, staff, yes, this is an issue. You should put this into your work program. It's all dependent upon being able to get the funding to hire consultants, but put it into a work program to go back and revisit these things that this ad hoc committee came up with, related to what Leonard has brought up and what Mike has brought up. Some of that may lead to future changes to design and construction standards. It could be changes to land use regulations. So that's one particular thought process, not saying it's right or it's wrong, but that's one potential way to approach it.
Thank you, Doug.
Yeah, thanks, Doug.
That was a very good summary.
Thank you, Doug.
So how, it sounds like that seems like that would be something that this committee would be interested in doing. So how, what's the way to move forward with that, Doug?
Doug is, can someone unmute
Doug
him?
is-
There. Okay. I'm not sure that it's necessarily tonight,
Mhm.
but I think you brought up questions about concerns that have been raised. I think, Brett can catalog those as we move
Okay.
into the next meeting. We can capture that and come up with a list and say, this is what we've heard from this committee's discussion of things that are outside the specifics of the modeling related to the storm plan, but they are more design and construction and or land use related that we believe we want to make a recommendation to the city council, and it's got a list of, A, B, C, D, whatever it may be. When this master plan goes to the planning commission and to the city council, then we would embed that information in those documents and say, the committee came up with these additional recommendations. Planning commission and council, what would you like us to do with it? If you want us to address these issues, they can provide direction to do that. And then that would put it into a work program, and staff would be coming back then through our budgeting process and through briefings with council to say, okay, we can work on this particular aspect at this point in time. We're going to need consultant services. We're going to need dollars to be able to do that work.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Doug. What I was going to say as well, I'll capture the comments and the things that I've identified tonight, but also not just tonight, if there's things that come along, you can email those to me and we'll capture those and get those identified to present back.
Yeah, based on, I think most of you got the draft plan of what we have so far a little while ago, but I heard someone only got it today. So we're extending the deadline to submit that, preferably by the 23rd to Brett, but you can get it in by the 28th if you want to, just whatever.
Yeah. Thank you, Natalie. That's related to we provided the draft of the first few chapters of the draft, this first round of the draft of the master plan update. If there's any comments along that as well, to get those in that we can feed back to Natalie and the consultants for consideration into incorporation. The other item is, I think this exercise we're going through with the prioritization, these are all good ideas that are coming into there. I think we're going to run out of time as we go through this element. I'm kind of thinking that my thought is maybe it's a matter of ideas that people have. We'll take the ones we've got, any additional ones, and look at those as well. And because it looks to me like what we need is some clarity as to what are the terms being used, and then how that goes forward.
So I might,
Only-
I might,
Oh, sorry.
might suggest this listening to the conversation is one of the big issues is defining the terms. There's no definitions for these priority criteria that's there. And I agree with you. The 2014 plan doesn't define them. So that's one task for staff to come back with. And that's something Brett and Karin and I can talk about. I think the second is you've given us some tidbits of what you're thinking about for criteria themselves. Might I suggest you allow us to go back and maybe look at some other stormwater plans to look at their criteria and be able to push that back out to you, and then provide the opportunity, if you have feedback, is to send that feedback directly to Brett. We can't create virtual online meetings, you know, a chain mail kind of meeting, but I think we might be able to put together some options of criteria, get that out to you, and get your comments back to Brett. And then we would have that for our next meeting for you to kind of look at and say, do you agree? And then you're kind of doing some wordsmithing rather than trying to create something holistically brand new, which takes time in a group setting.
My only concern with that idea is we're planning on having the committee review the draft plan in the next one, meaning everything will be done. So I don't know that it seems like we need an intermediate step besides the next meeting, or we need to push out the second draft, one of the two. And I can let city staff decide how we want to go on that, but we can't really, we need to figure out what timeline we want to have on that. So
We may
Yeah,
need to-
Natalie, let's, Brett and Doug and I talk about that piece of the puzzle, whether or not it means adding another meeting, or what we do with that. But
okay.
let's not worry about that, but we'll figure that out.
Okay. Yeah. So
I made-
I guess I was just giving you the heads up that it may not be the next meeting when we talk about it. It may have to be in between if we don't do the other meeting. So
I
Yeah,
made some
anyway.
recommendations today where, you know, I think we need to change our drainage philosophy. The thing we don't realize about these drainage calculations that we're using, it's like getting a COVID shot. You know, your arm's going to hurt a bit. Then you go back for a second one and you do. Well, when you do stormwater calculations with the 2, 5, 10, 25-year storm, really you're generating more runoff in the winter and less runoff in the summer. So while you're keeping the storm to the flow rates of a 2-year storm or 5-year storm, the storm's going on for a longer period of time and it creates more damage in the downstream corridors. If you walk through George Fox, you see the sewer lines 4 or 5 feet above the water level with all that dirt washed into the river. So we need to change our philosophy so that we just don't keep the flow rates the same. We need to keep the total flows the same, because we can't keep flushing all the water out to sea in the winter and then having everything dry up in the summer. So in my recommendation, I think we should go to a zero runoff standard. And it's not a new process. It's pretty well documented. It's reviewed and approved by the DEQ for small cities. I think we should adopt that as part of this plan, that we're going to change how we do this and keep the water where it belongs, going back into the ground like it historically has done.
There's other issues you run into with water rights and that sort of thing. That is not as simple as it may seem. It's certainly something that we can put in the recommendations to something to look into, but yeah.
I'm happy to discuss that because I'm a water rights examiner among other hats that I wear.
As am I, aren't we all? Okay. Yeah. I just get your comments to Brett on that. I think with everything on this, make sure to formalize your comments in an email to Brett. We've kind of been taking notes, but that way we get it in your words, the way you want to say it, whatever. Is that okay with you, Brett?
Yes.
I
Okay.
want to thank Brett for sending my comments out.
What did you say?
What I said is I want to thank Brett for sending my comments out.
Yeah, well, you're welcome. Yeah, no, that on any of these comments and things that come in from the committee, we'll definitely get those in and get those distributed. The idea is we'll would get them into an agenda packet and have them for discussions at the meetings. Or at least therefore all to review and decide whether to discuss and where those go.
It would be very helpful though, from a staff perspective. If you have comments, getting them the day of a meeting is problematic because people don't have time to review. I know on the planning commission side, we require that you have comments in, basically 3 days before a meeting. That allows time for staff to get comments out, everybody be able to review them so that they're prepared when they get to a meeting to have a discussion. Just a suggestion.
All right, let's move on. We only have a couple more slides. So about design criteria, I think we've pretty much beat this one into the ground. We're looking at it at a very high level. There's going to be potentially a future project that looks into it in a lot more detail. We've already got some recommendations. If you have more recommendations, send them to Brett. It's kind of with that. So, next steps. It sounds like some of these might be a little wishy-washy after we talk with city staff and figure out. Eventually, there'll be a second draft coming out. I'm not sure if it's before or after the next CAC meeting. So somewhere in there, we're gonna do that. And so after you've reviewed the second draft, which will include all of the sections, then you'll hopefully recommend it to go to the planning commission, which will eventually send it to city council. That's really how it works. Yeah. And then a picture of an owl with questions. So did you have more, Brett? I know you were concerned about time, so I didn't know if there was more you wanted to present on.
I think you've covered it there. I think we got some, and we talked about direction and next steps there. I believe we're good. Any questions from the committee?
I don't have a question. I just have a comment in regards to Leonard's suggestion about zero runoff and investigating that. I would also like to see what that would look like and what that would take for the city. So.
Sent a PowerPoint presentation to Brett, and I don't know if you got that or not.
I did. I saw it, Leonard. Yeah.
If I may, it seems that there's a, it's not in any way in conflict. I absolutely agree with the information, the assertions that Leonard put out and about the thinking. And it's certainly been on my mind the last couple of weeks as well about how what the meaning of this committee is. And so they're really, and it seems that what we've primarily been doing is responding to the consultant's master plan, pragmatic. Here we got some pipes and we're going to do something with them and help us make decisions about how we're going to do something with these pipes. But there's a whole nother, and I hear that from other members of the committee, there's a whole nother area of this idea of water that we're considering, even if we're not considering as per the agenda so far, is this idea about how the city of Newburgh thinks about and deals with water altogether, I think. And certainly with stormwater, the potential of stormwater being a reusable resource over and over again, actually. And there's many examples of medium-sized cities doing some pretty extraordinary things with stormwater runoff. And so if we're going to be used to this, the council to the decision makers in the city of Newburgh, then perhaps we can break up the agenda and talk about the bigger issues of this kind of direction and this thinking that perhaps, obviously there's many people on this committee who have considerable knowledge and ideas about this, and that we then we deal with the pragmatics, which clearly need to be dealt with as well, as two distinct, obviously related, but two distinct areas of the agenda. And then it would be maybe flow better and easier to for the consultant to talk about the things consultant can talk about, and the city to talk about the things the city can discuss with the committee members. And it's just really a recommendation. Maybe we construct the agenda in such a way that Mike and Leonard's comments are dealt with in a more free-flowing kind of way, and then the pragmatic stuff we can just get kind of, as someone recommended, get the words right and move on from there, and just make it easier for Natalie to go about her business too. So perhaps, I guess I'm just moving that we construct the agenda in such a way that can happen.
Is that, Brett, is that within the scope of, or what would that be possible within the scope of this committee?
We would need to look at that, I think, to confirm how that would work and what those areas are. It sounds like what I'm hearing is we've got the kind of the, as was kind of voiced, the pragmatic elements of the stormwater master plan update as we're proceeding with. And then there's a secondary part of these recommendations that could go with this piece, like Doug had talked about, that there are other areas to be looked at and considered that are more on the overall philosophy, I guess, is where you're approaching this, if I'm understanding that correctly.
Our storm plan really needs to, that we're working on now, really needs to set the policy. We can work out the details, but I think we need to set the direction that we want to go, and we need to be headed towards a more environmental friendly handling of water quality rather than concentrating on flushing it out to the river as quickly as possible. That's a philosophical thing that we really need to address as part of this first phase.
Stuff maybe Brett or Doug can answer. I have a question in regards to that. When we're addressing, so what Connie brought up, how the city of Newburgh deals with water, do you utilize these master plans as your map for dealing for addressing those, or is that done in a different manner? Can you address whether this master plan is used as the basis for what the city needs to move forward with in the future in regards to, some political things, but also some pragmatic things?
It's the stormwater master plan is it's used in what we've been focused on and tasked with this project is related to updates associated with leading ultimately to the projects to address the stormwater issues that are identified, the flooding elements into capital improvement projects. Then there are elements of it that lead to design criteria components of how those are the thresholds, if you will, for identifying the projects, the project prioritization. Then there's a more bureaucratic element as other aspects that drive the project. And that's outside of the current scope of what we're currently doing with the stormwater master plan. And there's other elements that drive those changes. There are city code elements that talk about stormwater requirements. And then those are typically driven and then also lead to our design and criteria standards within the public works design and construction standards and storm treatments elements that the city projects that are followed for city projects, as well as for those by private development. So for me, it's like I say, we're gathering this information that we can utilize to pass on for recommendations, but I'm not clear that we have the ability to incorporate that directly into this master plan with what we're doing.
Okay.
I recommend that we do incorporate it into this master plan. We need to set the philosophy on really what our goal is. And our goal is not to keep flushing the water out into the river in the winter. And it's cheaper and it'll create better development, more friendly. And there's a lot of things we can do. And I put that in my letter today. And it includes some of the things we probably won't do as part of the master plan, like narrowing streets. I was the engineer for Charbonneau starting in 1977, and I still do work there. And I just have a client, a lady that bought in the old part of Charbonneau, and I asked her, you know, did you look at other places? And she said, well, I looked at the new area that they did when they converted the driving range to a subdivision. And she says, I just didn't like it there. And if you look at Google Earth at Charbonneau on the south bank of the Willamette River at Wilsonville, you'll see that project stick out like a sore thumb. And people don't want to live there, but that sore thumb is what we're mandating in Newburgh. And you know, Charbonneau, the widest street in there is 24 feet, and most of the neighborhood streets are 20 feet. And then they park in parking bays perpendicular to the street so that the area in front of your garage isn't wasted because there's a car parked on each side of it. So we can cheapen the cost of development. We can lower the cost of housing. We can create less runoff. We can do zero runoff design. All my projects now is zero stormwater runoff, and Habitat Restore in Newburgh is one of the prime examples. And it was an area I thought was going to be very hard to do. It was a DEQ contaminated site covered with packed gravel from decades of trucks driving over it. And we did rain gardens and pavers, because the nearest storm drain was down the street, I don't know, 180 feet into a substandard drainage over to the Swift Creek. In the first year, I thought, boy, it's almost filled up. It almost is going to overflow. My overflow was a 4-inch pipe to the curb. But the next year after the vegetation and I thought it was maybe under designed. Well, the next year, and from then on after the vegetation's established, never has over a couple inches of water in it. So now I'm thinking it's over designed instead of under designed. So my experience is this stuff works, and it's certainly a lot cheaper than following the stuff in our drainage standards and all of this stuff. And yes, it's a 2-year, 25-year storm and all that you design to, but we just don't have to do more pipe and put it into the river and create the problems for fish and everything downstream.
So this is my take on that. That's fine for new development, which is not at all what we're looking at as part of this plan. This is all existing problems because Newburgh has a policy where you can't change the runoff from pre-development to post-development runoff. It has to be the same. So this is all existing problems. So we can't put a detention pond in someone's front yard. We just can't do that.
That I disagree there, because
really,
people can do that anytime they want. City of Portland pays people to do that. We can do it. I put one in my yard.
that was your choice. Okay, I'm not going to get into politics with you.
Right.
All I'm saying is this isn't part of this plan, so we're going to move on.
We should encourage it as a way
You need to do that when the development standards are updated. So
right. We need to set the philosophy in our storm plan, so then we can go to the next step to the development standards.
and not everyone agrees with you. So just so you know, you have to balance maintenance with you have to balance all the stakeholders, not just you. So I don't know how we get to a point where we can just move forward with the scope we have, and then maybe in 5 years you put that in the plan. I don't know, but that's not what's in the plan this time.
Newburgh Habitat for Humanity did a new store in a parking lot, and they did not add any water to the city storm drain system that's identified on your plan as being undersized.
That's great.
And you can retrofit.
It's unrelated to what we're talking about.
If I could
Right,
make
so,
just
okay.
go back to Brett again. Clearly, everyone in the committee should be heard, and everyone has a different, or maybe similar, who knows, but reasons to be on the committee, and I can understand Natalie has a job to do, but surely if it's possible, as I said before, to actually manage all this with just a change to the agenda, even if it's agenda form, even if it just is a, as you said, you're kind of stretching maybe the purview of what the committee's supposed to do is to actually, have an initial discussion or even a final discussion on the not bureaucratic, I don't think it is called. It's really a policy on the policy implications of the master plan and the policy implications that people on this committee would like to have the city decision makers consider as they're considering the master plan at the same time. Separate from perhaps what Natalie's job is to do, is to get the sort of the job done that she's been given. Do you think that's possible, Brett, so that Leonard, and I would like to throw some things in there too, to be considered as a policy and as a vision statement, I guess you could say almost too, about what could be done, bearing in mind I'm very aware that you need to get on with the job too. So, but if we can construct it in such a way with the agenda, then it becomes a effective way of working rather than kind of a back and forth.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I think what we're going to need to do is I'll have to revisit that with Karin and probably Doug and Natalie, and we'll see what we can do going in that direction.
Great.
Yeah, I don't want you to feel like you were unheard, Leonard. And I'm not saying your idea is wrong by any means. I feel like I probably was a little over the top in how I reacted to. I'm sorry. I just need to be clear on what we're doing right here and what we can do and what we can't do based on what we're doing. So that's all. And it sounds like this is something that is in the plans to be addressed eventually. But in the end, what we're trying for is a capital improvement plan, which really doesn't detract at all from what Leonard is saying. They're not conflicting ideas. They can support each other if that's the direction the city decides to go in. But you need a capital improvement plan no matter what. You need development standards no matter what. The development standards are what they are right now. I've been told that they're going to be updated at some point in the future. I think the city's trying to figure out when they have budget to do that, and understanding that you guys all pay user rates and taxes to pay the city to do that. That's why that's not instantaneous. Yeah, that's that. I can't speak for how the city's going to deal with that, but I'm assuming that there will be citizen input for that. So, yeah.
I think what Leonard and Mike were saying again was a conversation they'd like to have with the city.
I agree.
And then there's a conversation that we need to have with you, Natalie. And again, I'll just reiterate, they are complementary and should drive each other to a certain extent, but they both need to be addressed, but they need to perhaps be addressed in a way that's, if there's any conflict, it's trying to fit the policy into the project decisions in the wrong order almost. I guess that's what you're saying, Leonard, and that some of these policy and thinking about water decisions should also be impacting how the master plan works as far as the decision making goes on the pragmatic rollout of a project. So.
Well, I can understand Natalie's
Brett.
position. She was hired to do a job, and I'm proposing that the job is be what she was hired to do, plus a little extra to start the city changing in a different direction. And I've talked to Karin on it, and we've had an agreement to work on it. And I think this is a great time to do that. And she
I
go along with it.
I think that Brett, you've heard our suggestions and recommendations, and you'll talk to city staff and get back to us about that. Yeah, about the
Yes.
possibility of doing that. Okay, cool. Given the sake of time, why don't we? Do we feel like we've concluded this and can move on to the next piece? I'm comfortable moving on. I don't hear anyone saying that they aren't. Let's move on to old business. Brett, do you want to talk about that? Or I guess Leonard?
Well, I think Leonard was looking to revisit from the last meeting.
Okay.
I think I'll leave it to you, Chair, to kind of ask.
Yeah. All right. So Leonard, as I understand, you were looking to potentially rescind the decision made from during the last meeting. As I understand it, because there was a vote taken, we need to hear if there's a motion to open and revisit the discussion to rescind the vote. So is there a motion?
Well, I think the motion that I made really has no bearing with what we're trying to do. I mean, it kind of picked a standard or something. You know, I made a motion to make a motion, but really that's from reading all the stuff I got today, and, you know, deciding how high the sewer should run in a manhole really is not something that we can really make an educated decision on with the amount of information that we have. So I was just, I've had more information from Brett on the goals and what we're trying to do in preparation for this meeting than I got on the last meeting. So I was just frustrated. So
Yeah. So are you going to make a motion, or are you feeling?
I made the motion in writing, so now it's going to require a second. Otherwise,
Okay.
it's gone.
Okay.
Yeah, so the process here is Leonard asked for a reconsideration of the vote that happened last time. You've heard his comments. If there is a desire by committee members, then somebody would need to do a second to reconsider that vote. And then you could have a discussion. And then there would be a point in time somebody would call for the question. And then there would be a vote.
Leonard, did you make that request based on the fact you felt we didn't have enough time to make an informed decision, or that you didn't like the decision that we made?
I felt that we didn't have the information to make any kind of a motion at the last meeting. And we're supposed to be giving recommendations to the city council, and the motion that I made really has no bearing on really what we're supposed to be doing. And before you make decisions to set policy, there's a lot that goes into it. You know, there's studies that you do, there's cost estimates, there's budgets. You come up with systems development charges, you come up with fees for new houses. You know, there's a big financial impact. And we have engineers on staff, and what are their recommendations? Why would they expect us after the committee, after 2 hours, to kind of be able to set policy without any recommendations or background information or anything? I just felt we were just kind of blindsided. And so I don't think my motion really accomplished anything. And I thought, well, maybe we should just get rid of it. That's up to the committee. I'm not sure what it's going to tell the city council to do. I'm not sure what impact it's going to have on systems development charges. I'm not sure what impact it's going to have on our sewer taxes and sewer bills. You know, I just don't know that stuff. I don't know what the recommendations are the engineers that the city is paying to come up with opinions on that. That's all I have to say.
Is there a second on his motion?
If there's no motion, if there's no second on the motion, then the motion fails.
That's correct. And I'm not offended.
It does not sound like there's a second. So motion fails. Can we move on to public comments? Are there any public comments?
I have not received any, and Karen, I don't believe we have any public on the line.
There's nobody except the committees on the line.
Okay, items from staff next. Anything from staff?
Yeah, a couple of things. I want to thank everyone for all the input and the discussions and everything that's going on here. Also wanted to just kind of a little housekeeping. There was emails, and I mentioned the last time about the security training, and understanding the majority of this committee was not enrolled initially when that deadline and things was item. So you received some information on that. And so you should be getting that training and moving forward with that and your timeframes for completing that. And then also just want to reiterate, there's the email accounts that you all have. That's kind of the main things of communicating with me and me with you as well. So kind of my intent is I've been using a variety of emails to get information out to you. So hopefully everybody, looks like everybody's gotten that. But we're going forward, we'll be using the city email accounts for distributing the information is the intent there. So. And that's what I've got.
Great. Items from committee members. Do we have anything? Doesn't sound like we have any items from committee members, so let's adjourn the meeting.
I'll move we
Meeting.
adjourn.
I heard Leonard have a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
Sure.
Second.
Madam Chair, your meeting is adjourned.
Great.
Thank you.